where are we? Livy. Livy, History of Rome. We gotta study this. Give me the summary of Livy, History of Rome. Ab Urb Condita. What survives major themes in the storyline from the founding through its existent books? Holy shit. 142 books. Are they like one chapter each? Livy wrote monumental book. 142 book history of Rome from its beginning to the founding to his own day 9 BC. Only books 1 through 10 and 21 through 45 survive, plus fragments, epitomes of others. His goal is to create Rome's moral character and greatness, show how virtuous, courage, discipline, and piety built Rome, warn that moral decline threatens the state. Well, it did. It did. When did Rome become an empire? 27 BC. At that point, they already lost their republic. Threatens the state. Well, you lost it. It's 9 BC. Providing edifying stories of heroes and turning points. In books 1 through 5, Rome's kings, the legendary kings, early republic. Book 1, the kings. Founding myths. Aeneas, Alba Longa. Romulus founds Rome, establishes senate and army. Saba and Woman episodes, successive kings build institutions, Numa, Tullus, Ancus Marcius, Tarquins. Ends with tyranny of Tarquin the Proud and rape of Lucretia, prompting the end of monarchy. Book 2, Founding of the Republic. Consuls replace kings, struggles of patriarchs versus plebeians begin. Heroic stories. Horatius, Cocles, Mucius, whoever these are, first succession of plebs, tribunes created. Decemvirs and 12 tables, Romans' first written laws. This is where the tablets come from, Moses' tablets. Actually, no, this is where... No, Moses' tablet is where the 12 tables come from, right? So which parts of it is important to classical education? The point of studying Livy is not to roll into Roman history, is to absorb moral examples, political wisdom, civic identity, and rhetorical models. Hey, what's up? Only some parts of Livy truly matter for this purpose. Here's the ones that shaped classical education. Yeah. I'm trying to get through Livy now. Third part. Founding myths. Why it matters. Teaches origin stories, civic virtue, and the idea that nations rise from character. Models, episodes of courage, law, religion, kingship, iconic episodes. The early republic and civic virtue, book 2 to 3. Shows how free republic are built and sacrifice and genre power. Explains the movie. No, I haven't seen it. Maybe I should watch it? Should I watch it right now? Wouldn't it be copyright? Probably. Maybe I'll watch it and decide. This guy's reacting to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, man, I'm not gonna lie. In business. Building.
This guy's watching it.
Oh, they probably got off on about a...
It is not a question.
Oh no, but I basically know the entire storyline, right? Is
more
this the movie?
exciting movie journeys. Today we are done personal mission. The
Okay, yeah, that's not it. It's 2 hours. I don't think that's it. It's the gladiator. I'll probably watch it later. I'll find a way. I'll probably, I don't know, pirate or something. History of Rome. Civic virtue. Livius. I gotta. Let me see a summary. Summary of Livy.
Okay, so Livy, like I said, he's talking about a period that's hundreds of years after he was born. You know, he was a contemporary of Augustus, and he was actually close, in the entourage of Augustus. They had a similar outlook on life. That, they were both conservative in their moral values. And Livy, I believe Augustus actually
I might just watch clips of it
was
too.
a sponsor of Livy in his history, so you have to keep that in mind as one of his biases. But Livy was one of these men in Rome who, he was wealthy enough where he could devote his entire life to writing history. He didn't have to take on a profession. He was never a senator, but like I said, he was very close to the Julio-Claudians, and he was a big part of that moral and religious revival that Augustus began when he took power. So when we're looking at Livy's histories,
I've
there's
heard
a lot of
about it on the
biases,
news.
a lot of issues we have to think about with his.
They're hit with an
recounting
earthquake
history.
again.
Like I said, he's a moralizer, and he's kind
Yeah,
of pushing
7.2
these
earthquake in
ideals that
Aomori.
the
Tsunami
Julio-Claudians,
warning.
that Augustus is pushing when he takes power. He
Wait, it's
encouraged
upgraded to
patriotism,
7.6.
ancestral ways in his histories. It's almost like an Aesop's fables type of situation.
There's also
where,
a fire.
he's telling a story, and he's really trying to get some sort of moral across in these stories, whether there's a bit of truth in them or not. And so, another issue we have here is, are his sources. Okay, I think I have a slide after this that goes into it more in depth. But you can see here, the traditional founding date of Rome is
30
753
injured.
BCE.
That's how much time I spent so far. Or that's how much time I spent on classical history.
Not just Greek, but classical education.
Damn. Feels bad for this guy. There's like 30 cars and this one car got hit. Anyways, summary.
Livy is writing these histories close to the turn of the millennium, and he, what are his primary sources? His oldest source he has for this.
Titus Livius, better known as Livy, is a name mentioned often on this channel. He serves as one of the main sources for basically all that we know about the early Roman Republic. His magnum opus, Ab Urbi Condita, or From the Founding of the City, consisted of 142 books. It covered Roman history all the way from its legendary founding by Romulus to the reign of the first Roman emperor, Augustus.
And most of it got lost. It's like Only a third of his book survived.
While we only have 34 of those 142 books, those 34 are still invaluable to our understanding of Rome prior to the sack of the city by the Gauls in 380.
What you mean you lost the First Punic War? You didn't lose the First Punic War. Three Punic Wars fought between Rome, Carthage, and two main powers of the Mediterranean. Outcome. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province. Rome emerged as the victor. What do you mean you lost? Oh, the books got lost.
87 BCE.
No? No, it's saying the First Punic War, they lost it.
But who was Livy? Why?
Period from 167 to the outbreak of social war, the civil war between Marius and Sulla, death of Sulla in 78. From 78 BC through the end of Gallic War, from the civil war to the death of Caesar. First wars of triumvirs down to the death of Antonius. The rule of Augustus down to the death of
Why is
Drusus.
his work so important? Are his accounts believable? And how did Livy write his works so far away from the events in question? Let's talk about it. Titus Livius was born in the Roman city of Patavium, modern-day Padua, in 59 BCE. At the time of his birth, the city of Patavium was the leading city in northern Italy. It was the second richest city in all of Italy, behind Rome itself, and served as the de facto capital of the Roman province of Cisalpine Gaul. We know next to nothing about Livy's early life, or his family. However, we can probably assume that his family was at least affluent. Quite frankly, poor Romans did not get the opportunity to study history and culture as Livy did, nor would they have been able to devote the amount of time that Livy did to writing Ab Urbi Condita. While we are fairly positive that Livy's family was not wealthy enough to be in the upper echelons of Roman society, they were almost certainly wealthy enough for Livy to not need to work, and for him to be able to comfortably spend his days studying and writing.
Wow, bro.
In 49
Stay at home.
BCE, 10 years after Livy's birth,
Living in their
the
parents'
province
basement.
of Cisalpine Gaul was incorporated into Italy proper, and all of its inhabitants received Roman citizenship, including Livy. This would serve to be invaluable to Livy, as it basically allowed him free reign to travel around Italy. In Livy's teenage years, the 40s BCE, Rome was embroiled in a series of civil wars. These civil wars really stunted Livy's education. Typically, Romans like Livy would travel to Greece, where they would study under some of the most famous philosophers, historians, and other academics of the period. They would learn Greek, be tutored on the works of men such as Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek legends, and would likely even learn the most basic rules of writing and composing large volumes of writings. We know that Livy did not spend any time in Greece, because throughout his writings, Livy makes several translation errors that anyone who spent a good amount of time in Greece itself would never make. This would actually lead to several contemporary Romans bashing Livy by calling out his provincialisms in his writings. Eventually, though, Rome stopped, or I guess really paused, the seemingly endless cycle of civil war, and Livy was finally able to travel, and the first place he went to was Rome itself. We don't quite know when this travel occurred, but it was likely sometime during the 30s BCE. For the rest of Livy's life, Rome would become a sort of second home, never quite being his primary home and never quite replacing Patavium. During his time in Rome, Livy was never personally involved in government. He was never a senator, nor held any other position within government. Several of his writings contain simple mistakes on elementary military matters, likely indicating that Livy never served in the Roman army, nor received any sort of education on the matters of war. All of this didn't stop Livy from becoming ingrained in the upper echelons of Roman society. We know that Livy and Augustus were at least aware of each other, with some sources even stating that the two were friends. Suetonius, a Roman historian writing in the 1st and 2nd century AD, even tells us that it was Livy who encouraged the future Roman emperor Claudius to write about Roman history. Claudius would go on to write several volumes on topics from the Etruscans all the way to dice playing. This is hypothetically possible as the lifespans of both men do overlap for a few years, but I personally find it hard to believe. Instead, this likely served as another way to improve the reputation of Livy in the centuries following his death. In fact, this whole connection to Augustus would massively benefit Livy's reputation among Romans in the centuries to follow. Now we come to Livy's most famous work, the Ab Urbi Condata. It seems as though Livy devoted nearly the entirety of the second half of his life to this collection alone. He probably started writing it at roughly 32 years old, which would mean he started writing roughly in 27 BCE. The first 5 or so books were published right around this time, and were instantly a hit among the general population. Livy
John
would
Cena versus
continue to work
Gunther.
on these books for the rest of his life, typically releasing 10 or so
I thought he
books
retired.
every
I swear he got.
So,
I swear he
let's stop
retired.
here and talk about Livy as a historian. The
Did he not
bias of
retire?
the Ab Urbi.
Didn't he do his retirement speech? Not yet.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Okay, he said he'll
please
retire in
welcome
2025, so
16-time
this is his last one.
WWE champion John Cena.
Let me course correct it. It's my retirement from the WWE.
he announced this in 2024. I have a feeling he doesn't want to retire.
He'd be right. Like, hey, you or side. Mitts. Play in the house that you built.
And 1 year later, I will force John Cena to give up his final match.
Precisely know hero. I'm gonna drop you on your head. You.
I'm gonna miss John Cena's entrances. The Shadow Clone Jutsu. Wait, didn't he just do a Joe Rogan show? He did. I'm gonna watch this later.
The Condata, and how and why we still use Livy's writings today. First of all, Livy was a terrible historian, either by modern or contemporary standards. He did next to no primary research. This would have been searching through, say, governmental records, eyewitness accounts, essentially anything that gave an account of the events from someone present. Instead, Livy relied nearly exclusively on earlier histories. Livy also writes in a way that you would expect of a Roman. Victories by Rome are embellished, and his writings typically include some sort of hero who saves the day, a Cincinnatus type of character, while also downplaying Roman defeats. Livy was also very obviously writing in a way that built Augustus's new regime into the culmination of all of Roman history, and the peak, so to speak, of Roman power. This is all to say that Livy was frankly a terrible historian. He did nearly no research of his own, he allowed his biases to completely take over his work, and he wrote with a biased, predetermined goal in mind. This begs the question, why do we even consider Livy's work to be worth anything in the modern day? Well, to be honest, we don't really have much else. Yes, there is Dionysius and Plutarch, but Livy's account still remains the most detailed and complete history of Rome prior to the sack of the Gauls. That event is actually where this conversation should really go next. It is extremely hard to overstate the impact of the Gallic sack of Rome on our understanding of early Roman history. Nearly all of what would have constituted primary sources for the events during the Roman kingdom and the first centuries of the Roman Republic were either looted or destroyed in the subsequent fires and general mayhem that a sack brings to a city. This was of course bad for Livy when he was writing, but this is even worse for our own understanding. Without these records, at least even accounts of them, we are forced to use Livy's and other contemporary historians' accounts, mixed of course with a bit of archaeology. Because of this, we can't simply decide to ignore Livy's account. It is one of the few that we actually have for the period that was written anywhere near the time periods in question. Instead, we have to essentially go through Livy's work with a fine-tooth comb. We have to attempt to pull the truth from the legend and separate what is actually history and what is made up. So what sources did Livy actually use? Well, Livy mostly relied on earlier writers to make up the bulk of his history. These included men like Quintus Fabius Pictor, the earliest known Roman historian and father of Roman history. Livy relied on a series of writers who would eventually become known as the Annalists. These annalists were further separated into two different categories, the older and the younger. The older annalists, which extends to roughly 150 BCE, essentially wrote events down with no care for style or attractiveness. In our modern view, this was probably most similar to, say, a textbook or an encyclopedia. Essentially, these men wrote that this event happened on this day, with this many people, and so on, with none of their own opinions, but also with none of the more human details behind the event. So while these sources would be good for dates and numbers of men, they miss one key aspect of history, and that is the motivation behind the events in question. The younger annalists were essentially the exact opposite. They wrote much more like Livy. They would still record dates and events, but they wrote for style, and they wrote as patriots. So terrible defeats or embarrassing moments for Rome would be lightly documented, while Roman victories would be embellished and exaggerated. We have next to no surviving accounts from these annalists, so it's nearly impossible for us to tell just how accurate these individuals were. However, we can assume that information from the older annalists would probably have been more accurate. This is all to say that while yes, Livy was a terrible historian, and yes, Livy was almost certainly completely biased towards ensuring that Rome looked good, we have to use what we are given, and the breadth of Livy's work means that we can't simply ignore it. Ab Urbi Condita is, in some cases, the only
Rome?
written piece of history we have
I've heard
on
about
some
it.
subjects. Because of this, it has to be used in any discussion of the period, just with the caveat that some of the accounts and stories should be discounted as false. Livy was also actually more skeptical than many of his contemporaries. Not only did Livy remove many events and stories that he deemed too history, but he also prefaced
Actually,
much of his
I have seen
writings
this. I've seen a few episodes. That's Caesar, right? It was the one where Caesar gets assassinated. Yeah, I've seen his face. I remember watching something like this. You haven't seen it? Yeah, the thing with Julius Caesar versus Pompey.
The Rubicon. Surely he does not think to attack Rome directly. I think that is exactly what he would do.
It's Pompey.
The ram has touched the wall. No mercy.
Spartacus. Is that another one on Spartan?
The series finale.
I have a fair trade. 500 of your men taken in battle against Crixus for Tiberius's life.
New episode Fridays at 9 on Stars.
I think I have seen this. Life of Spartacus, gladiator who led a rebellion against the Romans. I feel like I've seen it. Isn't the Emperor Mark Aurelius the old dude? His father figure or something?
Next episode is only before this.
There was an emperor, I remember that. House of Asher. There's a new one coming out. Ooh, 5.6. It didn't do very well.
here. Of one.
Sure.
The gift. Behold.
With warnings about the more, shall we say, fantastic pieces of his history. He says in the first book on the Roman kingdom, quote, "The traditions of what happened prior to the foundation
The actions
of the
are usually
city,
great in those
whilst it
series.
was being built,
In history
are more
series.
fitted to adorn the creations of the poet than the authentic records of a historian," end quote. While quotes like this do not excuse his use of obviously unreliable sources, it does point out that he at least engaged in some sort of editing. Livy really should be considered a compiler rather than a historian, as he really just put together the earlier accounts of Roman history into one large piece of writing. Livy would die in the year of 17 in his hometown of Patavium. By this point, he had written 142 books on Roman history, and his work would go on to inform, inspire, and engage billions of people even 2 millennia after his death. I think one quote of Livy's really shows us just what his goal was.
I'm just gonna read a
with writing
summary
his
of
work.
it.
He said that he did not care whether his personal fame remained in darkness, as long as his work helped to, quote,
History of Rome by
preserve the
Livy.
memory of the deeds of the world's
Corpus. History of Rome originally compromised. We know that. Book 1 to 5. Legendary founding of Rome. Founding of Rome. Oh.
The History of Rome.
Short version.
By Titus Livius, Livy. This is an introduction to the text by classics in audiobook.
Titus Livius, known as Livy, born circa 59 BCE and dying in 17 CE, was, even during his own lifetime, a renowned Roman historian. His monumental work, Ab Urbe Condita, literally meaning from the founding of the city, chronicled the history of Rome from its legendary origins in 753 BCE to his own time during the reign of Emperor Augustus. Born in Patavium, the modern-day Padua, in northern Italy, so far as is known, Livy was never directly involved in politics or military affairs, which gave his writing a unique perspective. Livy's history originally spanned 142 books, although only 35 have survived in full today. His narrative style was vivid and engaging. As he alerts his reader to in his preface, his early history blends myth, legend, and historical sources to create a compelling account of Rome's rise to power in Italy. He emphasized moral lessons, often contrasting Roman virtues with his perceived decline of his contemporary society. In his celebrated books on the Second Punic War, he relates in rich detail Hannibal's invasion of Italy and Rome's stubborn resilience. Though sadly many of his later books are lost, summaries written centuries after his death do survive. These summaries hint at the vast detail with which he recounted the...
Okay, wait, this is way too long. All of this is one book. I'm just gonna read a summary of it. City by Romulus, the period of kings, early republic, down to his conquest by the Gauls. Founding of Rome. Just gotta see that.
Rhea Silvia was the daughter of Numitor, king of Alba Longa, when her father was deposed by Amulus the usurper. Rhea was forced to serve among the Vestal virgins, so that she would not continue her father's lineage to death. Amulia's children were banks of the river, whereas she...
I'm just gonna get to ChatGPT. Tell me what classic education teaches and the significance of these segments. Below is a clean, structured explanation what classical education teaches, what Livy segments you are asked about within the educational framework. Virtues and ethics, character determines destiny. Virtue, courage, justice, temperance, prudence is formed through examples. History is a treasure of moral models. Civic participation, republic building. Students are taught how free states are formed. Okay, teach me. And give examples. Classical education teaches that noble character produces noble outcomes and vice produces ruin. Livy provides this with dramatic examples. Example, a free people survives only because individuals are willing to risk their lives for the common good. Example from Livy, enemy army rushes across bridge into Rome. Crashes orders Romans behind him to destroy the bridge while he stands alone against an army. He blocks the crossing, takes wounds, stands firm until bridge collapses, then he jumps into Tiber and swims safely in armor. Heroism is not killing enemies, but it is sacrificing yourself to save others. Discipline, self-mastery, principle. A virtuous person controls himself not in terror and pain. Mucius, captured by Etruscans, he proves Roman courage by sticking to his right hand into fire and letting it burn. He says, "See how little the body means to those who seek glory." Willpower. But we just learned from last chapter, from Thucydides, that it's not about those things. Temperance, humility, principle. Power is safe only when held by a man who does not desire it. Cincinnatus. He's found plowing his small farm. Rome is in crisis. He is made dictator. He defeats the enemy in 16 days, immediately resigns power, walks back to his home. This is the Washington thing, right? This is what Washington is based off of. The Americus Cincinnatus. Civic education, how republics survive. Classical education teaches that freedom depends on laws, compromise, and civic duty, not just battlefield glory. Law over men. A republic stands on laws that bind rich and poor alike. 12 tables. Plebeians demand written laws because patriarchs manipulate unwritten custom. Romans agree and create 12 tables. First, public legal code. Lesson: law does not protect the powerful, it protects the weak from the powerful. Lord of the Rings. I've seen the first movie, The Hobbit. I was confused on where to start, so I just started off with The Hobbit. Or the one where, what was the first movie? The first in the trilogy? I don't think I was supposed to start off here. Yeah, I started off with this one. Okay, so I started off right. I started off with this one. God damn, bro. All this money they made. The return of they made $1 billion off of this. But yeah, it was a pretty long movie. It was like 3 hours, I think. I only watched the first one. I don't remember much from it. Tell me about 12 tables in Roman history. The foundation written code in the Roman Republic, marking the first time Roman law was formally codified and publicly displayed. Background: in the early Roman Republic, law was controlled by patriarch, magistrates, and priests who interpreted customs orally. This created resentment among plebeians, commoners who felt excluded and exploited. Conflict of the orders, ongoing struggles between patricians and plebeians. 11 Oscar nominations. Yeah, back then it must have been a pretty good movie. Like, you had a lot of budget, right? Like, I was surprised this was a 2001 movie. Like, it was... Like, the amount of cinematography and camera work that they put in. Yeah, it felt like a modern movie. Conflict and orders, ongoing struggles between patriarchs and plebeians led to major plebeian demands for legal transparency and equality. Alright, here's the 12 tables. Court procedures, summons, trial by judges, theft, debt, and debt bondage. Execution for unpaid debt. Whoa. What's the rule here? 30-day grace period. After a court judgment, the debtor has 30 days to pay. If still unpaid, the creditor could physically seize the debtor and bring him to magistrate again. 60-day period of bondage to work off debt. Debtor was handed over to the creditor and bound with fetters and chains weighing not less than 15 pounds. For 60 days, he was kept in creditor's private prison and forced to work. Okay, so this is like you not paying at a restaurant, and then now you have to scrub the dishes for a few days, or a few hours. The creditor had to bring the debtor to the forum in the front of the praetor's tribunal and publicly announce how much he was owed. So it's just humiliation and free work for a few days. On the third market day, possible death or sale into slavery abroad. You can become a slave. If no one paid the debt or provided surety, the creditor had two options. Adicere servitutum, sell the debtor as slaves across the Tiber, capital punishment. If there were several creditors and Confederacy replied, on the third market day they shall cut him into pieces. Literally, the creditors were allowed to divide the debtor's body proportionally. What do you do with the body? You just do it because you feel good? Ancient sources argue whether this was actually done or was just a terrifying symbol threat. Nexum. It's very ancient solemn contract formed with bronze scales and a witness, scale holders. By saying certain rituals and touching bronze, a free Roman citizen voluntarily put himself into a state of quasi-slavery until debt was repaid. The debtor became nexus, bound, and worked for the creditor, lost his civic rights, but remained technically free. 12 tables regulated Nexum but did not abolish it. Real-life severity. These rules were not theoretical. Livian sources describe cases where debtors were beaten to death, sold abroad, or kept in chains for years. So the system ended pretty soon. There was something else. There was something about women. Rights of paterfamilias, father's family, including power of death. Deformed children could be killed. This is like abortion, but like for children. Inheritship, guardianship, and owner status. Ownership and possession of property, contracts, land and boundary disputes, rights of way, torts, delicts, private wrongs, injury, private damage to property, theft, cutting another's trees. Famous penalty, 25 asses per tree. Asses? Donkeys, right? Tell me about woman's status. Inheritance, guardianship, and women's legal status. Inheritance. When a man died, his property did not automatically go to his wife and children. The 12 tables established the first statutory order of succession. First, sui heredes, their own heirs, persons who were deceased potestas at the moment of death, usually sons, daughters, and wife and manu. Adopted children also counted. They became legally independent and inherited equally, share and share alike. If no sui heredes, the nearest agnatic male relatives, brothers, uncles, father's side, etc. If no agnates, the gens, the wider clan inherited. Transformers scored 18%. Yeah, most of the money comes from people trying it out for the first time, right? Like, if it gets a bad review after people watched it and they already paid the money, it doesn't really matter. If no agnates, the gens, key points. Daughter inherited equally with sons. Wife did not inherit unless she was in Manu, had entered husband's legal power through a special marriage form. Most wives in the 5th century were married sign Manu, therefore remained their father's potestas. They inherited nothing from their husband. Cognatic relatives completely ignored. Wills. Tables recognize the right to make a will, but only very formal ways. Testament, calatis, twice a year before people's assembly. On battlefield just before battle. Later a third form, with bronze scales developed. A valid will can override the interstate rules above. Famous rule. As he has bequeathed concerning his property of guardianship, so let it be law. This was the legal basis for almost unlimited testamentary freedom in later Roman law. Guardianship. In early Rome, anyone who was not a paterfamilias needed a guardian or tutor for important legal acts, selling land, making a will. What about women's legal status? They just don't exist. In the world of 12 tables, no adult woman was ever fully independent under the law. Not even a widow, not even a rich one, not even a 7-year-old grandmother. This is one of the harshest and most distinct features of early Roman law compared to many other ancient societies. Here are the key rules that define a woman's legal position. Lifelong subjection. A woman was always in the legal power of a man, either her father, her husband, or a guardian. Perpetual guardianship. Tutela, whatever that is. Any woman who became her father died, she was not in her husband's manors, immediately fell under the lifelong guardianship of the nearest male agnate. So basically, women are forever children, right? Woman, exact or near exact wording. Woman, even if they're full age, shall be in guardianship because their lightness of mind. Guy is quoting. So they're saying women are so naive that they always need to be treated like children. Like, they're so innocent of how the world works that they need to be treated like a children forever. A woman shall not alienate landed property without the authority of a guardian. She cannot sell land, make a will, free a slave, or do most important legal acts without her tutor's authorization. If she was sui iuris, everything she owned or inherited was legally hers. She could only manage it through her male approval. No political rights, could not vote, obviously, hold magistrates, or appear as judges or advocate in court. Woman, marriage forms and power, come manu. The wife passed into the husband's power, she legally became like his daughter. Sign manu. She remained in her father's power even after marriage. Her husband had no legal control over her property or person. Adultery is sexual offenses. A husband who caught his wife in adultery could kill her. And a lover. A father who had potestas over a married daughter retained the right to kill both her and her lover even after she was married. If a husband finds his wife in adultery, he may kill her with impunity. I don't know, man. Are you sure you want to do this? Punishment for women. Certain crimes like drinking wine believed to lead to adultery were punished more severely for women than men. Patria potestas, including the right to kill a daughter, for serious moral offenses. If a woman had drunk wine, it is not wrong to kill her. Did they change it later? Yes, the extreme restrictive legal position of women under the table is gradually dismantled over several centuries. By the time of the late Roman Empire, Roman women were among the most legally independent in the ancient world. Alright, so we got a good ending. Late 2nd century, final legal abolition. So they abolished it officially in the 2nd century. Formal confirmation? Complete equality in private law by Justinian's time. Later about loophole. What it meant, rich women started doing a fake sale of themselves to a trusted friend, who then appointed a straw guardian who always rubber stamped whatever she wanted. Perpetual tutela became meaningless formally for the so they had a loophole. So even if you were a woman, like, you could pay someone to be your guardian and let you do whatever you want. That's a loophole. Free marriage. Same menu became almost universal. Wives no longer entered the husband's menace, so husband never gained legal control over wife's property. Women kept and managed their own dowries and inheritance. Augustine marriage laws. Women who had 3 children received ius liborum, total exemption from the tutela, even if no children survived. This was a huge privilege for the upper-class mothers. Tutela of adult women gradually abolished in practice. Emperors Claudius is said to have formally ended tutela for agnostic women in some cases. Later emperors extended it by 2nd century. Only women who still needed a tutor were unmarried minors or women without the ius liborium. By the end of the 7 emperors, the perpetual guardianship of women was effectively dead. Jurists simply stopped mentioning it as a living rule. Cool. Funeral regulations? Not interested. Supplementary laws, prohibition in intermarriages between patricians and plebeians. Later repealed in 445 BC. Miscellaneous rules on usury, slavery, etc. Who was considered a slave? Were you like born into it, or did you have to sell yourself into slavery? By the late mid-5th century, Roman law made a very sharp distinction between free person and slaves. A slave was not a person in the law. He was a thing that could be owned, bought, sold, tortured, or killed by the master with no restrictions. War captives, the largest source. Anyone captured in a just war or born into captive mother. Legal status, automatically a slave, no rights at all. 12 tables implicitly accepted this. The child follows the womb. Debt bondage. A free citizen who formerly bound himself to an Nexum contract for a loan. A sale of a free citizen abroad by creditors. If a citizen debtor was not redeemed after the 3rd market day, then he becomes a slave. Criminal punishment. Serious crimes. Self-sale of children. A free person could sell himself or a child into slavery, especially in famine. Piracy and kidnapping. Common Mediterranean. Foundings. Expel children. Babies abandoned by parents and picked up by someone. Become slave. Who was not a slave? Freeborn Roman citizen, Latins and other free Italians, free foreigners living in Rome, citizen Nexum. Okay. That's the 12 tables. Checks and balances. Liberty survives only if no one class can dominate. Plebeians leave the city, succession to protest abuse by patricians. Romans fear losing half its population and economy. Solution: tribunes created, protected by sacred law, able to veto patrician abuses. Conflict should be solved through institutions, not violence. Is checks and balance since different back then, or is it the same concept? Great question. Answer is both. Intro idea of checks and balances recognizes them theories, but built on very different structures and assumptions. Shared core idea: no single person or class should hold all power. Well, that's gone. They got an emperor. Power should be divided so that each part of the government can check the others. Both systems try to prevent tyranny of an individual, domination of one class or faction, concentration of military or financial power, exploitation of lower classes. Principles the same. Like the founding fathers openly said, they borrowed it from Rome and Polybius. What's different? The mechanisms. Rome's checks. The system evolved to prevent domination between these classes, old aristocracy and everyone else. Example, executive power, mostly patrician, tribunes, exclusively plebeian, tribunes and veto consuls, senate legislations. Tribunes could veto consuls, senate legislation, consuls could veto each other. Senate wasn't a branch, it was an aristocratic council. Rome's system is like aristocrats versus commoners, negotiating stability. US system is legislative versus executive versus judiciary. Each limit each other. Roman checks were built on personal rivalry and honor. Ambition to counter ambition. Virtus competes with virtus. Political offices to be held by men with powerful families. Public shame to restrain officials. This is not neutral. Institutional structure like modern constitutions is a cultural system as much as a political one. Rome did not believe in co-equal branches. There were no equal branches of the government. Senate dominated long-term policies. Consuls held king-like powers for 1 year. Tribunal protected the people. Assemblies passed laws. Censors controlled morals and finances. Praetors oversaw courts. Power was fluid, overlapping, and often chaotic. Veto power existed but used differently. Roman veto. Any tribune could veto anything done by magistrate, could even stop a trial or military levy, could freeze public businesses by sitting on bench outside the— Hey, yo! Yo! This is, what is this called? What is it called when a senator vetoes by talking too long? Filibuster. Yeah, that's the first filibuster. Technically like a filibuster. Modern veto. Executive veto legislation can override, limited, formal structured. Rome's veto was much broader and much more political. Rome often solved deadlocks by creating a dictator. If checks and balances froze the system, Roman appointed a dictator. One man absolute authority, 6-month limit, used for wars, emergencies, and crises. This is a complete foreign to modern constitutionalism. It only worked because of Roman culture. I mean, like Cincinnati stepped down voluntarily. So is the concept the same? Power must be divided. Each power must restrain the others, prevent tyranny through balances. Different mechanics. Rome's system evolved organically from class conflict. Modern systems are architectural, deliberately designed. Rome depended on civic virtue. Modern systems depended on legal structure. Rome lacked separate branches like the US. How the founding fathers interpreted a mixed constitution with monarchy, which is the consuls, aristocracy, which is the Senate, and democracy, which is the assemblies and tribunes. So technically, we're not a democracy. We're monarchy, aristocracy, and a democracy. We're all three. They took the principle, not the structure, redesigned it in separation of powers, bicameral legislature, executive veto, judicial independence. Hamilton, Madison, and Adams all cited these Roman examples directly. So, there we have it. We're not a democracy. We're all three. Short answer. Concept is the same. Execution is different. Roman gave us the idea of distributed power. In modern constitutionalism gives us machinery. So technically, we are a monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy all at the same time. Yes, in a classical political theory, the US is exactly that. A mixed constitution combining monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy at the same time. We're all three. We're technically a monarchy. We have a king. ruled by the best, elite minority, democracy ruled by many. Each form has good and bad vision. Monarchy is tyranny, aristocracy is oligarchy, democracy is mob rule. To avoid corruption, Paulius said, the ideal government is a combination of all three, so each balances the others. This is exactly how Romans entered the Roman system, and exactly how the founders designed the US. Wow. The Romans, bro. I'm also surprised the founding fathers knew this system. The Democratic House of Representatives, the President. Then what is the judicial branch? Then who are the judges? Aristocratic element equals judiciary. So the president is the monarch. He's the Senate or consul. And then the House of Representatives are like the tributes or plebeians. I don't know. The Fall and Recovery of Crisis, book 45. Hannibal books, Strategy, Leadership, Roman Greek. Okay. Civic resilience is more important than temporary sack of Rome by the Gauls. The Fall and Recovery from Crisis, why it matters, classical teachings. Fall and Recovery from Crisis. What year is this? The Sack of Rome. The first sack of Rome. Fortitude and national disaster, civic loyalty, even when everything seems lost, the difference between complete ruin and temporary and permanent collapse. Because classical education trains character, and nothing reveals character like a catastrophe. Key examples like Rome, Gauls defeat Rome in River Allia. They enter and burn the city. The Romans consider abandoning Rome entirely and moving to Veii. Camillus intervenes and gives a final beseech. Rome is not its walls. Rome is its people and their courage. Classical lesson. A nation survives not because it avoids disaster, but because it recovers with dignity. The story became the moral model for Renaissance republics, American founders, British blitz spirit type rhetoric, any classical training civic virtue. The Samnite Wars. Character under pressure, why classical educators teach them. These books show how republics improve the hardship, not comfort. What teaches discipline or humiliation, moral duty winning, convenient, adaptive institutions, a republic modifying itself to survive. Key examples, Claudian Forest, Rome is trapped in a mountain pass by Samnites, forced to surrender without a fight, Roman soldiers are sent under yoke, a ritual humiliation, consuls swear an oath to Samnite terms, when they return, Senate says we honor the oath. To keep the oath, Rome hands over consuls, the ones who swore it, rather than break a national promise. The Rome reforms its army and comes back stronger. Classical republic must be morally upright, resilient enough to rebuild after humiliation, smart enough to reform institutions. This is a key classical education because it teaches moral responsibility and practical statescraft simultaneously. Hannibal books. This is the most taught part of Livy. Alright. Well, I think I know it. This is the Punic Wars, right? So we can skip it. Fabius versus Scipio. Fabius, the strategy. Scipio versus Hannibal. How victories, defeats shape political behavior. Hannibal crosses the Alps, Battle of Cannae, where they lose, and they come back. Fabius did it later, the Fabius strategy, and then Scipio, the hero. Yeah, we can skip this one entirely. Rome and Greek East. Empire, morals, and power. Why classical teaches? It's because Rome begins becoming an empire, and Livy shows moral cost. What it teaches: how republics become imperial powers, how wealth, conquest corrupt political morals, how liberation rhetoric becomes imperialism. Examples: Feminist proclaims freedom for Greece, ostensibly liberates the Greek cities from Macedon, but Rome gradually becomes the new hegemon. Classical lesson: every empire believes in bringing freedom, few are honest with themselves. The victory at Pydna. Rome crushes Macedon. Immense wealth flows into Rome. Livy emphasized the beginning of moral corruption, luxury, bribery, political decadence. Why important in close education? The section is heavily used to teach imperial overstretch, corruption that accompanies sudden wealth, the fragility of republic institution, and luxury. Tell me. Tell me more about this. I feel like we're going that through today. How Rome became imperial powers. Livy shows that Rome never planned to become an empire. It happened step by step through a combination of a defensive expansion. Rome often begins by saying, we must help this ally, we must punish aggression, we must secure our borders. Example: Rome helps Greek city-states resist Macedon, not conquer Greece, but to stop Macedon influence. Classical insight: empire rarely begin with open ambition, they begin with necessary interventions. Repeated victory creates responsibility. After Rome defeats a foreign king, a power vacuum leads to instability. Foreign states ask Rome to arbitrate disputes, and Rome feels responsible to keep order. Rome begins acting like a global policeman. This is how republics drift into empires. Victory, responsibility, intervention, influence, and control. Allies become dependents. Greek cities at first love Rome because Rome frees from Macedon. Then they start asking Rome to settle disputes between them. Eventually, they rely on Roman legions to enforce peace. Dependents become dominants. How wealth, conquest, corrupt republic morals. After defeating Macedonia and the Hellenistic world, Rome is flooded with gold, slaves, luxury goods, political bribes, foreign ambassadors, and military glory. Livy emphasized that Roman character changes. Luxury replaces simplicity. Old Roman virtues, discipline, frugality, austerity, duty, decline as new wealth brings banquets, arts collections, Greek luxury imports, extravagant houses. Romans start competing for luxury instead of honor. Political corruption increases. Foreign kings pay Roman senators for influence. Examples: after Pydna, ambassadors arrive with gifts. Roman senators taking bribes to support blocking foreign policies. Before empire, political competition was about virtue. After empire, it becomes about money. This is where we're at. This is where America's at. Military glory becomes path to personal power. Generals begin to seek personal allegiance, personal fame, political dominance. The line between service and republic and personal ambition blurs. Eventually leads to Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Caesar, all using their armies for domestic political leverage. How liberation becomes imperialism. This is one of Livy's most subtle lessons. Rome claims to liberate Greece. Flaminius famously declares the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games. Greeks go wild, cheering and crying with gratitude. This is 196 BC. And then 30 years later, within a few decades, Rome intervenes in their courts, Rome manipulates political factions, Rome imposes settlements, Rome garrisons troops, Rome destroys Corinth. Classical moral. Republics tell themselves they're spreading freedom, but their actions often create domination. The rhetoric remains noble. The reality changes. Rome keeps saying, we protect Greek freedom. We stabilize the region. We prevent tyranny. But practically, Rome chooses which leaders rule. Rome uses peacekeeping to justify influence. Rome punishes cities that resist its decisions. Freedom becomes conditional. Liberation becomes strategic control. The founders were obsessed with this lesson. They read Livy and Polybius because they feared a powerful public human empire, overseas war corrupting domestic liberty, wealth and expansion weakening republic virtue. This is why Washington warned against entangling alliances, and why Jefferson said republics fall when they embrace empire. This is why this matters in the two-class classification. Livy's lesson is not ancient history, it's political psychology. Republics expand because of success, not ideology. Empire brings wealth, and wealth erodes Republican character. We are liberating them is the oldest imperial excuse in history. Livy teaches students to recognize danger signs of imperial overstretch, understand how morality shifts under wealth, see how noble rhetoric masks power politics, analyze long-term consequences, not short-term victories. This is why classical educators treat books as essential. Well, shit, bro. We're here. America's here. Doesn't America do this today? Here's the most honest, short answer, yes. America today exhibits many of the same political patterns that Livy believes and other classical historians describe. Not identical, but structurally similar. Classical thinkers say America behaves like a modern republic with imperial responsibilities. Rome's pattern: help allies defend themselves, win wars overseas, stick around to maintain stability, gradually manage entire regions. American parallels: NATO missions, Middle East and Persian Gulf presence, Pacific security guarantees, interventions framed as peacekeeping, stabilization, and defense of freedom. Exact same language. Like Rome, the US didn't set out to create a far-reaching global presence. It's built one because of victory in World War II, responsibility for global order, deterrence against threats, requests from allies. This is exactly the pattern Polybius described. Liberation rhetoric turning into long-term influence. Rome freed Greece from Macedon, stayed to manage disputes, imposed settlements, became de facto authority. US uses language like liberation, helping democracies, humanitarian intervention, containing aggression, but after intervention, bases remain, long-term advisory missions continue, political influence expands, economic or security dependence form. Again, structurally similar to Rome, though for different moral reasons. Wealth and power affect internal conflicts. Livy's warning is that global power changes domestic moral culture. Rome's effect: increased in luxury, rising political corruption, generals seeking personal glory, factionalization at home fueled by foreign entanglements. Modern parallels: not that America is 2.0, but classical theories would say money from global trade and defense industry shapes politics. Lobbying from foreign partners influence policy, military success becomes part of political branding, internal factions argue about foreign policy direction. Again, ancient pattern, modern echoes. Global security burdens equals empire without calling it an empire. Rome didn't call itself an empire until late. It said, we protect allies, we keep the peace, we prevent tyranny, and America says we maintain international order, we deter aggression, we protect democracy. Both accidentally became the central power in the world system. The classical thinkers would say America is a republic managing an empire. Political scientists often call this informal empire, hegemonic republic, imperial republic, a phrase used by Harry Jaffa and others. Just like Rome, a republic internally, hegemon externally. The dual identity creates stress. But here's the key classical joint. Livy and Polias would not judge America by motives. They would judge it by structure. Does a republic to command global power risk weakening its internal virtues? Does overseas commitment stretch institutions and civic unity? Does wealth from dominance change political incentives? These are the exact pressure that transformed Rome, and any political republic will face them. If you want, I can go deeper into any of these. Okay, so America in 2025 is similar to Rome in which year? Great question. America in 2025 is around Rome in 100 BC. So we're good. We're like 100 years away from becoming a complete empire. Okay, so we're not there yet. So we have some free time. This is the part everyone should study. Oh, that's Livy. Plutarch. Plutarch. Lives. Very influential. What is this? What is Plutarch's Lives? Greek philosopher. We're getting into Greek now. Plutarch Lives 1. The Historians. What is this about? Plutarch's Lives, Parallel Lives, is a collection of biographies from famous Greeks and Romans written in the 2nd century AD. Written by Plutarch, a Greek historian moralist, contains about 50 pairs of biographies, each pair featuring one Greek and one Roman figure. Each life is not just history but also moral study. Plutarch explores character, virtues, and vices. The Greeks and Romans in each pair are often compared to highlight similarities or differences. Why is it important? Moral and character education. Plutarch's goal is to teach lessons of virtue and leadership, not just recorded facts. His lives was a primary source for Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, influenced Shakespeare, Montaigne, and the founding fathers. He provides role models and cautionary tales about ambition, justice, prudence, and courage. Bridge between Greek and Roman. Plutarch shows connections and contrasts between two great civilizations, fostering understanding of classical virtues. Sources of detailed history and anecdotes, and even when not always strictly accurate, lives preserve value historical stories, speeches, and customs. Examples of famous pairs. Greek figure, Alexander. Roman figure, Julius Caesar, both ambitious, transformative conquerors. Demosthenes, Cicero, famous orators defending the republics. Lycurgus, Numa Populus, legendary lawgivers shaping societies. Theseus, Romulus, founders and cultural heroes. How Plutarch's Lives used in classical education. To study leadership qualities and moral choices. To explore how personal virtues affect political and military success. To understand the human side of history, ambition, jealousy, honor, and downfall. To learn through stories, making abstract political philosophy vivid and memorable. Key themes explored: virtue and vice, what makes a great leader, fate and free will, how much can character change destiny, public service, duty to the state over personal gain, hubris and humility, lessons from pride and downfall. If you want, I can summarize some of the most famous biographies. Explain how Shakespeare where founders use Plutarch, dive into Plutarch's style and approach to history, discuss specific moral lessons from lives. Would you like? No, just tell me the parts, important parts, and explain with examples. Important for classical education. Absolutely. Here's a focused breakdown of the most important parts of Plutarch's lives for classical education. The theme of virtue and moral character. Plutarch isn't just telling you what happened, he's showing you how personal virtues shape and vices shape history. Example: Alex the Great, Julius Caesar, both brilliant generals and leaders who reshaped the world. Plutarch highlights Alexander's ambition and generosity, but also occasional excesses and recklessness. Caesar's cleverness and charisma are praised, and his desire for power warrants potential tyranny. Classical teachings. Great leaders succeed by virtue, but fall if corrupted by pride or cruelty. Understanding character is the key to understanding history. The role of leadership in republics. Plutarch's biographies of world leaders statement emphasize leadership qualities essential to republics. Example: Demosthenes and Cicero. Both were powerful orators defending republics from external and internal threats. Plutarch explores their courage, rhetorical skill, and political challenges, showing how leaders can influence public opinion and safeguard liberty. Classical teachings. Oratory, wisdom, moral courage are critical for maintaining republics. Leaders must balance ambition with service to the common good. Founders and lawgivers. The biographies of early cultural heroes underline the importance of law and tradition in building stable societies. Example: Lycurgus, Spartan lawgiver, and Numa Pompilus, Roman king, both credited with establishing laws and customs that shape their societies, virtues, and stability. Plutarch highlights their wisdom, moderation, and piety. Classical teaching. Laws and customs are foundations of political order. Stability depends on institutions reflecting moral values, dangers of hubris, and tyranny. Many biographies warn of dangers when leaders become overambitious and despotic. Example: Nero, Roman Emperor, and Alcibiades, Athenian general. Both gifted but ultimately self-destructive. Plutarch examines how their pride excess led to ruin. Plutarch often includes vivid stories illustrating virtue and vices. The story of Cincinnatus, who left his farm to lead Rome in crisis and voluntarily gave up power. The story inspired the American founders' idea of citizen leadership without service without ambition. We need more of this. Can we get more of this? Can we get some Cincinnatus? Classical teaching. Stories and examples are more powerful than abstract principles. Role models inspire virtuous behavior. Why these parts mattered in classical education. They teach ethics through history, not just facts, but lessons about how to live and lead. They show how personal character impacts public life. They provide role models and cautionary tales that guide citizens and leaders. They make history human and relatable. Encouraging reflection on timeless political dilemmas. Can we get like a brief summary? God damn, bro. How long is this shit? It's gonna take way too long. Takes way too long. Just give me a... Can I get a brief summary? Why study Plutarch?
Many years ago, the great New Testament scholar Martin Hengel said there was a danger in young exegetes knowing a great deal about a single book, the critical edition of the New Testament, and not realizing that there was a vast library of material in Greek that belonged to that world and without which that book was without context. At the heart of that book lie 4 texts, the Gospels, which have a biographical form. They were produced in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries. Exactly contemporaneous with the composition of those 4 texts is another body of biographies by the great Greek writer Plutarch. With me, I've Professor Judith Mossman, our Professor of Classics, and you actually are one of the great authorities on Plutarch.
That's very kind, thank you.
Okay, will you introduce to us Plutarch, this other biographer?
With pleasure. Actually, Plutarch, I think, must have been something of a pleasure to meet. He was well off, a member of the Greek elite, as we say. He was born in a little place called Chaeronea, which is in Boeotia, sort of on the road between Athens and Delphi. It's not a big place, and he says at the beginning of one of his biographies that he continues to live there so that it may not become any smaller, which is a nice example, I think, of a slightly humorous cast of mind. He was a Roman citizen. His Roman name was Lucius Mestrius Plutarchus, and he was acquainted with some very important people in the Roman Empire. His biographies are dedicated to Sosius Senecio, who was consul with the Emperor Trajan in a sort of honorary capacity at the beginning of Trajan's reign. Now, Plutarch is best known as a political biographer, and a lot of the most engaging aspects of him are on display in those political biographies. It's also very important that they're arranged in pairs. The full title of them is The Parallel Lives. And in these pairs, he takes one Greek figure and one Roman figure. The Greek figures are from all over Greece, so some Macedonian, like Alexander the Great, some Athenian, like Pericles, some Spartan, like Lycurgus or Lysander. And he pairs them with Romans, partly sometimes on the grounds that their lives have a similar sort of trajectory or can be given a similar sort of trajectory, but also partly simply, as far as one can see, because he sees them as similar personalities. One of the wonderful things about Plutarch is how complex the characters that he presents really are. They're not all admirable by any means. Some of them are extremely dysfunctional. Some of them start well and end badly. Some of them end less badly than they started out. The characters are really created through the deployment of a multitude of anecdotes, some of which have become absolutely iconic. His telling, for example, of the taming of Bucephalus by the young Alexander is a very famous scene. If you look indeed at some of the recent film version of Alexander, or pretty much any film version of the life of Alexander the Great, you'll find it heavily invested with Plutarch's life. The other thing, though, is that you do sometimes get Plutarch's own opinions formed in the text or presented in the text, and a very clear personality of the biographer emerging.
I'm just curious.
Through.
Does our U.S. military teach classical education? Great question. Not in traditional full sense. Yes, the U.S. deeply values and teaches key elements of classical education, deeply, especially in professional military education. Classical history, U.S. academies require study of classical military history. Institutions like U.S. Army War College and Naval War College extensively use works by Thucydides, Livius Polybius, classical Greek and Roman military forms as foundations. Leadership and ethics, classical texts, especially Plutarch's Lives and other moral philosophy works, are used to teach character, leadership, and decision-making. Concept of virtuous and the balance of courage and prudence comes straight from classical ideas. Rhetoric and critical thinking. Authors should receive training in clear communication, persuasion, strategic thinking, all rooted in classical rhetoric principles. civic responsibility and service. The idea of citizen soldier is a classic ideal revived in American military ethos inspired by stories of Cincinnatus who served temporarily and returned to civilian life. But the military's curriculum is practical and mission-focused. It doesn't teach the full classical education programs like Latin, Greek, classical philosophy. The emphasis on lessons from history and ethics that apply to modern warfare and leadership rather than broad humanities curriculum. Okay, what about the important parts? What about the part about keeping a republic and virtues? Great question. The classical idea of republic survives if a citizen's leadership maintains certain virtues deeply embedded in military education, especially at higher levels where leadership ethics and nature of the republic are discussed. Virtue as foundation for leadership, for military leadership. Military stresses integrity, honor, courage, and self-discipline and loyalty. Virtues that echo classical virtues the Roman prized. Officers as guardians of the republic. The U.S. military's oath to support and defend the Constitution reflects the idea that military leaders and soldiers are protectors of the republic's political order, not just warriors. This echoes Roman ideals where soldiers were citizens first, and their role was to defend the republic's institutions, not political power. Education, military ethics, and dangers of corruption includes dangers of corruption, ambition, unchecked virtue, and political interference by the military. These lessons come straight from classical warnings about how ambitions and loss of discipline led to Rome's decline. Civil, military relations. Cool. What about dangers of turning into an empire? Absolutely. The danger of turning into an empire, however, is taken seriously in the U.S. military education and political thought. Classical warning: empire weakens the republic. Ancient thinkers like Leopold Caesar argued that when the republic expands into empire, the burdens of ruling distant territories and wealth from conquest corrupt civic virtue. Military commanders gain power that can rival civilian authority. The focus shifts from service and duty to personal ambition and luxury. This leads to internal divisions, political corruption, and eventually breakdown of republican institutions. How do U.S. military and leadership think about this? Strategic caution in overseas commitments. U.S. and military civilians leaders often discuss the imperial overstretch problem, the risk of spreading military forces too thin, causing vulnerabilities at home and abroad. Military doctrines emphasize sustainability and clear objectives to avoid open-ended wars that drain resources and political will. The Republic versus the Empire debate in political circles. Military leaders' strategies recognize the tension between maintaining global security commitments and preserving domestic constitutional order. This debate echoes classic concerns about how imperial ambitions can undermine the Republic's stability, civilian control, and preventing military autonomy. A core lesson from Rome's fall is preventing generals from using military power to dominate politics. The U.S. military education system stresses civilian supremacy and dangers of military overreach. Officers are trained to understand their role as servants of the Republic, not as political actors. Ethical training on war and power. Military ethics course explores moral limits of power and responsibility of military leaders to avoid creating new empires that corrupt. Lessons from history and used to foster restraint, humility, and use of force. Broader political implications. Military leaders are also citizens aware of the fragility of democratic institutions. Many discussions within the outside of military reflect on imperial overreach and risk alienating citizens and weakening political consensus necessary for a republic. So, what was I gonna ask it?
His responses to the anecdotes that he tells, he gets very annoyed with Cato for wanting to sell on elderly slaves and says, I wouldn't do that to a dog.
Oh, right, Trump. Has Trump learned classical education? That's a nuanced question. Whether Trump has formally learned classical education in the traditional sense, meaning a deep study of classical literature, philosophy, is unlikely. based on what's publicly known. That said, themes like leadership, power, and rhetoric are universal and can be absorbed directly. In some, Trump has not publicly associated a classical education. Is there anyone in his branch, his cabinet, that learned about classical education? Anyone in his cabinet? On novel cases is Michael Anton, a former Trump administration official, policy director, graduated from St. John's College, Annapolis, which is known for his great books curriculum. At what level in the military do you have to learn study classical education? Great question. Initial officer, basic level. All cadets receive broad liberal arts education that often includes course in history. However, this is an introductory level. Classical education is part of a larger curriculum, not the main focus. Junior officer, professional. Okay, so what's that guy's name? Pete Hegseth should know about classical education, right? Connected military service, whether he has formal training in classical education is less clear. What we know, military served in the Army National Guard, deployed to Iraq, gives him first-hand military experience. Education, holds a law degree, attended Princeton, public role, political commentator, and former CEO of Veterans Organization. Does he know? Princeton University offers a strong liberal arts education, and it's likely he was exposed to some classics. His law degree involves study of critical thinking, ethics, and history, but typically doesn't emphasize classical education unless pursued as an elective. So it's possible. However, there's no public evidence. Okay, what about Dan? He's from the military, right? What about Dan Raising Cane's? Dan Cane's. Raising Cane's. General Kane? Dan Kane. This guy. He is known as an author. He's an author. Speaker, public intellectual. His background, military service with conservative traditional thought. Active. There's no detailed public record. Initial lessons from Roman Greek history. He appears well read in classical philosophy. How does he relate? Important, often as his role in preserving public values. Modern cultural decay is common to frequently references classical thinkers like Plato, Cicero, to famed contemporary. So he should, right? But at that level, he should have learned. From military, right? He should have. It's very likely he has received substantial exposure to classical education elements through military training. Meet the senior level PME officers and seniors enlisted to this level. This often includes reading and discussion of classical texts as Thucydides' History of Peloponnesian War, Plutarch Lives. Hey, that's what I'm reading. That's where I'm at. Tell me more about Plutarch Lives. There's a deeper look. Written by Plutarch, Greek philosopher. Explore moral character, virtues, and vices. Originally composed in Greek, later translated into Latin, became cornerstone of Renaissance and late education. Important. Primarily aims to teach virtue and warnings against vice. Human history, laws, motivations, emotions. Basically, be like George Washington. Give me examples. 2. Alexander's authority among the conquest, brought some dictator, showcase ambition and leadership on a grand scale. Lessons. Virtue and ambitions. Both leaders were visionary but had flaws. Alexander's recklessness and Caesar's thirst for power. Balance of power. Caesar's crossing to Rubicon symbolizes the tension between personal ambition and ruling limits. Classic Western takeaway. Understanding that great power requires great responsibility and unchecked ambition can lead to tyranny. What happens? Both were gifted orators who fought to defend their republics against growing threats. Philip Macedon, Athens, Mark activity for Rome. Key lessons. Rhetoric as tool for liberty. Their speeches embodied the power of words and politics, the defense of freedom. Civic duty. Both sacrificed personal safety for the republic. Classical education takeaway. The importance of eloquence, persuasion, and moral courage in public. What happened? Talented fellow generals, pride and ambitions led to personal downfall, political instability, danger of evil. Yeah, we all know about that. Biography period. Power and ambition as double edge. Leadership responsibility, limits ambition. Rhetoric defending liberty. Civic courage, power of speech. Selfless service and humility. Virtue and leadership, citizens show their ideal. Law and order foundational. Rule of lawgivers, social stability. Hubris and downfall. Moral dangers of pride, public and, versus private good. Okay, that's basically it. Polybius. The Roman Constitution. Let's go on to Polybius. Who was Polybius? A Greek historian from the Achaean League, captured and taken as Roman hostage, became closely connected to Roman elites. His work is one of the best contemporary accounts of Rome's rise to dominance in the Mediterranean. What his history is about? Polybius wrote and explained how Rome rose from regional power to control the Mediterranean world. He covers roughly from the period of 264 BC to 146, including the Punic Wars and conquest of Greece and the fall of Carthage. Unlike many historians who tell the stories, Polybius sought to analyze causes, systems, and lessons. Didn't Livy do this? The Roman Constitution. He argued the balance prevents corruption and decay. Each element checks the others. Montesquieu, pragmatic view of history. We believe history should teach practical lessons for leadership and governance, not just entertain. Criticized historians who told myths or exaggerated facts. His works models rigorous inquiry and cause and effect analysis. Military strategic insights. Polybius details military campaigns, especially Second Punic War and Hannibal's tactics, emphasize the role of discipline, strategy, and adaptability in Rome's success. Important stories and examples in history. Roman Constitution analysis, model of mixed government and checks and balances. Battle of Cannae, fall of Carthage, consequences of total war, imperial ambition, Roman relations with Greece. Tell me about this. What matter? Teaches political philosophies around the real history. Influence in Western thought. Influenced Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers. Mixed government constitutional design. His work was studied by Montesquieu, American founders, Machiavelli. Polybius is considered a bridge between Greek philosophers and Roman. Okay, tell me about this. Tell me about this with examples. Let's break it down. Political background and history. How and why states succeed or fail. Example, Roman Constitution. Polybius analyzed Roman government structure by looking at how real institutions functioned in practice. Councils, Senate, and popular assemblies wasn't abstract theory, it was based on detailed study of Rome's political process and outcomes. He concluded that Rome's mixed government gave it stability and resilience not seen in pure monarchies or democracies. Framework for understanding Republican government and dangers of corruption. Polybius described how political regimes naturally cycle through stages of decay unless properly balanced. And at closest cycle, he outlined how monarchies tend to become tyrannies. Aristocles we know that. Rome avoided these extremes by blending these elements and having checks and balances so no one group dominated. For instance, political discourse and corruption and ambition threatens to upset the balance and leading to decline, a cautionary lesson for Republican. We know. History lessons relevant to leadership and strategy, gave detailed accounts of wars, emphasized strategy, discipline, and adaptability, and admired his boldness, tactical genius, and leading through army through hostile terrain, feat of logistics and daring. Double envelopment nearly destroyed the Roman army, showing devastating effects of superior tactics. Despite defeat, resilience and strategic patience allowed it to eventually win the war. Lessons stressed that the military success depended not on brilliant maneuvers but also discipline. How to analyze history critically for practical wisdom. Polybius insisted history should be studied to learn lessons, not just entertain. He criticized earlier historians for telling fanciful and moralistic stories without verifying facts. Polybius approached sources critically, cross-checking accounts and focusing on cause and effect, for example, explaining how political corruption contributed to the fall of Carthage. Political corruption. Not military defeat? His method encourages readers to think analytically about historical events, to draw practical lessons for government and leadership, not just admire heroic deeds. Learning from real and sedition outcomes, and cycles, checks and balances, Hannibal's chronic, strategy, critical history and wisdom, methodical analysis of sources, practical lessons from verified history. I mean, I basically know what happened. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on. Wait. How is Polybius different from Livy? Oh. Explain how and why Rome rose to power with critical analysis and lesson political strategy. Chronicles Rome history, also was moral lessons of patriotic storytelling method. Analytical, pragmatic emphasis, cause and effect. Critical of sources. Neurodramatic, blending effect of legend. Emphasizing bridges and characters. History as moral guide, illustrative value. Style, the dense analytical, rich rhetorical, dramatic storytelling. Scope focuses mainly on the Punic Wars and rise of Rome, covers Rome from its legendary founding through Livy's contemporary era. Concentrates on political military events and constitutional analysis, covers a wide range of events mixing myth, legend, and history. View on Roman history, more objective, admiring Rome's system but also cautious about flaws and overreach. Highly patriotic, emphasizing how Rome emphasized greatness and moral superiority. Use of legend and myth, avoids myth, prefers factual accounts and critical evaluation. Freely incorporates the myth and legendary tales of Romulus, Cincinnatus to inspire moral lessons. Moral lessons focuses on political instability and corruption, balance of power. Focuses on personal virtues, civic duty, and moral character of individuals. Influence. Major influence on political theory. Founding father, military strategy, highly influence. Major influence on Renaissance humanitarianism, literature, and moral political education. Use in education, used for political philosophies, constitutional studies, and military strategy. Used for moral education, virtues, and civic lessons. Alright, go on to Tacitus, Annals of History. Absolutely. Who was Tacitus? He was a Roman senator and historian. This is like during the peak of the Roman Empire, right? Or transitioning to the peak. It was expanding. It was an empire at this point. Known for his penetrating, often cynical insights into power, corruption, and nature of imperial rule. Regarded as one of Rome's greatest historians and master stylists in Latin prose. What are Annals and Histories? Both works chronicle the Roman Empire's history, roughly from the death of Augustus and onward. Annals covers the reign of emperors, Tiberius, Claudius, Nero, and others. I heard Nero had a great rise and fall. And others focus on Julio-Claudian dynasty. Histories picks up from the era of 4 emperors through the Flavian dynasty around 90-60 AD. Together they depict the decline of the Roman Republic's values and the rise of autocratic imperial power. Why are Annals and Histories important to classical education? Insights into imperial power and corruption. Tacitus exposed the corrupting influence and absolute power and dangers of despotism. He portrays emperors as complex figures, some tyrannical, others ineffective, and the resulting impact on Roman society and governors. His example, says the account of Nero's reign, reveals a ruler increasingly detached, indulgent, and brutal. The political intrigues and purges under Tiberius illustrate how fear and suspicion corrode political life. Moral and political analysis. Tacitus is a moral historian who evaluates leaders based on virtues such as justice, moderation, courage, and integrity. His works implicitly warns against the loss of liberty and civic virtue that marked the transition from republic to empire. Hold on. But Polybius said it was because of overreach. Right? Like, it started way before. It was because entangling alliances. And it's because they got too wealthy, right? They got dependent on luxury goods from Greece. Complex portrayal of human nature in politics. Unlike earlier idealized accounts, Tacitus showed the dark realities of politics, ambition and deceit, betrayal, and fear. His writing encourages readers to be skeptical of power and vision of a fragility of freedom. Literary excellence. Tacitus' style is terse, dramatic, and often ironic, making his work a model of historical prose. His speeches, though partly fictionalized, reveals political arguments and rhetoric techniques valuable for study. Decline of political purges under Tiberius, loss of liberty and civil. Alright, tell me about this. Tell me about this with examples. Absolutely. Tacitus is a famous, unflinching, often grim portrayal of political life in imperial Rome. Ambition. Tacitus? I've been saying Tacitus. Tacitus vividly depicts how personal ambition drives many actors to ruthless and destructive behavior. Examples: rise and reign. Nero's ambition consolidated power, leads him to weak, eliminate rivals, including his mother. God damn. And his first wife, Activia. Tacitus shows how ambition blinds Nero, leading to tyranny and excess. Senators and courtiers often scheme and gain favor with the emperor to position themselves for future power. Deceit. Lies, false accusations, manipulations are rampant in Tacitus' Rome. Political survivors often requires cunning betrayal. Example: during Tiberius' reign, notorious Praetorian Prefect Sejanus manipulates the emperor and all orchestrates purges by deceit. He spreads false rumors to eliminate rivals and amass power, showing how deceit poisons politics. Tacitus describes how informers become tools of fear and manipulation, accusing innocent people to gain rewards. Betrayal. Loyalty is fragile. Alliances shift quickly as individuals betray friends, family, and country to save themselves or personal gain advantage. Example: betrayal by Germanicus by Piso. Tacitus recounts suspicions that Piso poisoned his beloved general Germanicus, reflecting treachery even among a Roman elite. Senators often betray one another under imperial pressure or in pursuit of personal gain. Fear. Tacitus repeatedly highlights how fear pervades Roman political life, especially under emperors like Tiberius and Nero. Fear leads to paranoia, show trials, and repression. Examples: the reign terror under Tiberius, where many senators live in fear of arrest, execution based on flimsy changes. Tacitus describes a climate where neighbors and family members inform on each other. Mercenaries are marked by growing fear of elites, leading to conspiracies and purges. Ambition, let's see. Betrayal, fear. Tacitus teaches that politics is often brutal, a brutal struggle for power rather than an ideal contest of reason or virtue. His work is a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and the fragility of liberty. It encourages realism and vigilance in political life. Is this a criticism of the current of the Roman situation at that time? Or is he saying this is just how politics always is? Great question. Both serve as sharp criticism of contemporary Roman Empire and more of a general commentary on the nature of politics. Wrote during the Roman Empire, when the Republic had a long fallen power concentrated on the emperor, he's quite critical of the autocratic and corrupt nature of imperial rule, showing how absolute power breeds tyranny, paranoia, and moral decay. For example, his accounts of emperors like Tiberius and Nero highlight how imperial rule destroys civic virtue and freedom. Atticus mourns the loss of republican ideals, liberty, but he never lived in a time when Rome was not corrupt, right? So he's saying, oh, but it used to be this way, it used to be better. It used to be better, but it never was better. It was always corrupt. Ambition, deceit, betrayal, fear, imperial features of political life, not just limited to Rome or his era. Okay, so he's saying in general, it's always been like this, and this is how it's going to be forever. His cynical and sometimes fatalistic tone implies that human nature and the thirst for power inevitably leads to corruption and conflict in politics. Tacitus's works invites readers to be vigilant and realistic about dangers of inherent political power, regardless of time or place. Roman Empire context, a critical expose of corruption and tyranny under emperors. Universal politics, a timeless depiction of political ambition and human fragility. Message: be cautious, vigilant, and mindful of political power's dangers. Give me an overall summary of Tacitus. Overview. Roman senators, scope animals cover reigns of early emperors. From Tiberius to Nero, focusing on Julio-Claudian dynasty, history picks up from the chaotic era of 4 emperors. It continues through the Flavian dynasty about 96 AD. Key themes: decline of republican virtue, civic freedom, moral integrity, and political accountability. Political intrigue and violence vividly explains conspiracies, betrayals, purges, civil wars that marked the imperial period, ambition and moral failure, personal flaws of emperors, elites, and the fragility of liberty and necessary vigilance. So it's a very cynical work. It's very pessimistic. The fragility of liberty and necessary vigilance. So how can people fight back? And I gotta get into this. Tacitus. Introduction. Tacitus 101.
Tacitus is one of the greatest
Tacitus.
writers of the Roman period, and I have a bit of a soft spot for him because he wrote my A-level set text. Let's have a dive into his life and times. Publius Cornelius Tacitus was many things. An orator, he was a fantastic public speaker, which is quite funny because his name, Tacitus, means the quiet one, but he was an amazing public speaker in his own right. He was a great politician, and he was very active in the public life of Rome, and he was a historian, and that is probably what most people have heard of him for. He was born around AD 56 and he died in about 120. We're not entirely certain, but they are the agreed upon dates from historians. He came from an equestrian family, so he wasn't one of the poor, he also wasn't one of the super wealthy. He wasn't a patrician, he wasn't from a senatorial family. His family were in the upper classes, but they were not the super top level. However, he had a good education, he did very well for himself. He married a woman called Julia Agricola, and she was very important because her father, Julius Agricola, will become very important in Tacitus's life. And as a fairly young man, Domitian was the emperor. Now, Domitian was not a particularly calm and peace-loving emperor. In fact, he had a sort of reign of terror, and it caused a time of crisis. Domitian was quite a brutal emperor, and he took quite a lot of pleasure in murdering quite a lot of the Senate and their surrounding people. He was not a calm emperor, he did not keep things very peaceful in Rome, and so part of the reason that Tacitus is so famous is because of his writings about later emperors who were much calmer, and he has a very positive view of later emperors, or some later emperors, and he has a very negative view of other emperors. However, this is all being mixed up in his early years, his formative years, when he's sort of 30 and onwards, and Domitian played a big part in who Tacitus was. Because he survived the rule of Domitian, he was able to look back on other periods of history with a different view to someone who was writing in Augustus's era, for example. There are several of his works that we want to talk about today. His monographs, his histories, and his annals. I'm going to take you through all of these with the view of analysing one of them in my next video. So the monographs. He wrote 3 major monographs that have survived that we know about on various topics between 98 AD and 102, so within about 4 or 5 years. The first one, De Vita Julii Agricola. Do you remember I said he married a girl called Julia Agricola? Well, this is about her dad, the life of Julius Agricola. The reason Agricola was important is he was one of the generals who was pacifying Britain, and that's why in modern times, especially in Britain, Tacitus is seen as a really important source because he gives us a lot of information about the peoples of Britain. His second was De Origine et Situ Germanorum. This is about the life, the beginnings, and the situation of the German people. Both of these fall into ethnographic history, and that means they tell us about the ethnicities of the people who lived there, and this was a really big thing at this time in Roman writing. They were very interested in where the people they were conquering had originally come from. So Julius Caesar was very interested in this. A lot of people have said because Tacitus has a very sympathetic view of the people being conquered, possibly he himself, or his family at least, were originally from Germany or somewhere on the edges of the Roman Empire. There's no evidence for that, but it is just very interesting that he does have a very sympathetic view of these people whose livelihoods and places are being overtaken by the Romans. His third monograph was Dialogus de Oratoribus. Now that is a dialogue about oratory, about giving public speeches. These all have shortened names, so the first one is called the Agricola often, the second one is called the Germania, and the third one is called the Dialogue, or the Dialogus. The next surviving work we have of Tacitus is his Histories, and this is published in around 105 AD. It's a history of the year AD 69 to AD 70. Now, it wasn't supposed to be such a small amount. In fact, it wasn't when it was published, but much has been lost. It was supposed to start in 69, which is after the death of Nero, but the original text went all the way through to the assassination of Domitian, which was in 96 AD. So we have lost about 26 years of this history. The bit we do have is very short, but it's very detailed and very rich evidence for the year of the 4 emperors, which starts when Nero is assassinated, the Emperor Nero, in 69, and it talks about the 4 emperors who came in very quick succession in the 1 year following Nero's death. It's a really rich piece of history, and historians particularly find it very useful for what happened in that time period, which can be quite confusing because the events happened so rapidly. Like I said, it was supposed to go up to Domitian's rule, but most of it has been lost. Now this was written in AD 105. Once he'd published this, he then wrote the Annals. The Annals were published in around 117, and this covers the period ab exgessu
Wait, so it's 2 books. So it's Annals and it's History. Compare The Annals and Histories. The 2 books. Annals covers the reign of emperors from Tiberius to Nero. And then Histories covers the era of 4 emperors. Focus explores early Claudian dynasties on decline, focuses on civil war, political upheaval, and restoration of stability. Themes: corruption, tyranny, loss of republic value under imperial rule, chaos of power struggles, violence, and establishment of new regimes. Tone: more detailed, often somber and critical of imperial despotism, more dramatic, highlighting brutality and civility of civil war. Structure: analytic ear-by-ear account though incomplete. Narrative: key events with speeches and dramatic episodes. Style: concise, pointed, vivid, explains how Rome recovered from chaos and the consequences of civil conflict. Explain this with examples. After Nero's suicide, he committed suicide? No clear successor existed. The 4 different men, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, claimed the imperial throne within a single year. This triggered a civil war across Roman provinces, with armies and factions battling for power. How did Rome recover? Somebody won. How did they recover from a civil war? Well, somebody won and took over. His role brought relative peace and stability after the chaos of rapid regime changes. Political violence and instability. Tacitus describes brutal battles, assassination, Persians as rivals fought for control. Battle of Bedricum, twice fought, where armies clashed violently. Rome's political order was shaken, with loyalty fractured. Erosion of trust in civic virtues. The civil wars intensified fear, suspicion among elites. Senators and generals often switched allegiances for surviving advantage, deepening political cynicism. Military increased role in politics. Legions became kingmakers, setting a precedent for military decisive influence over emperors. This shift weakened traditional senatorial authority. The foundings of Flavian dynasty. Vespasian restored order but ruled with more pragmatic autocratic style. He showed necessary but imperfect solution to end the chaos. So they recovered from civil war because somebody won and took over. That's basically what happened. How do we recover from a civil war? The country's all messed up. Well, somebody has to win. Like, they're not going to come together and shake hands all of a sudden, right? Somebody has to win. Civil war wins when strong figures take control, but this does not restore liberty or Republican values. Instead, it often solidifies imperial autocracy and military dominance. Stability comes to power, but freedom and virtue may be sacrificed in the process. What are the lessons to take from the 2 books? Growing silence and fear in the Senate under Tiberius, where many senators were executed or exiled on suspicion. Annals: dangers of political intrigue, ambition, deceit, betrayal, and fear poison political life. Sejanus' rise to power, Tiberius through lies, manipulation, and purge of rivals. Internal conflict causes destruction, distress, instability. Era 4 emperors fought brutal battles for control. Histories: stability often means autocracy. Peace is restored when one strong rule gains control, but at cost to liberty. So, do you want chaos or... So do you want peace Or do you want chaos? So what's the good option here? Military's political power. Reliance on armies undermines traditional political structures. Legion's decisive role in proclaiming emperors during civil wars. Importance of vigilance and virtue. Citizens and leaders must guard liberty through moral integrity and active participation. Tacitus frequently laments about lost Roman virtues and warnings about future generations. History as a warning. Understanding past mistakes help prevent future tyranny and chaos. Tacitus' critical narrative encourages the reader to learn from failures of early emperors and civil strife. Cool. Well. Getting to Homer next. That's the classical history. This is really important. Classical literature. What form did taste and ethics, logic, rhetoric, and oratory used for them? Aristotle's logic, Cicero's rhetoric, Quintilian Institutes and Enlightenment philosophy, John Locke, Hume, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Is this really important? Is this important for classical literature? So what do you mean? What? I gotta read the Homer? Do they read all these books? Or do some pick and choose? Or do some educations pick and choose? Usually don't read all these cover to cover, especially the long epic. Okay, so which one do I gotta read? No one typically reads every work in full. Classical education, most important influential parts. Okay, so tell me the ones I should read. That all the founder fathers read. Just the basics. Homer, Plutarch, I read that. I mean, just among the classic literatures. Which ones? The must read is Homer, Aristotle, Virgil. What about the others? Less common. Okay, so we're not going to read those. We're just going to read these 5. Homer, Aristophanes. So we're going to get rid of that. What about Virgil? Roman national epic inspiring ideals of duty, sacrifice, founding a great nation, parallels to America's founding. Okay, we got to read that. What about Ovid? Metamorphosis. More popular source as mythology, literature, political ideas, less central for founding. Okay. So, bye-bye. Cicero. Duties, republic, laws. Gotta read that. What about Horace? Yep. So just these 5. What is this? Sophocles? Less commonly studied. Most founders, but known as part of classical education, their works and ideas, indirectly. Just give me a brief summary of it. We'll get to it later. Alright, next up is Homer. The Odyssey. Also, was the Trojan horse a fiction? It was grounded in reality, right? Generally a myth or a legend. Okay, so it never happened. Does not appear in Homer's Iliad. I gotta change the title. I keep forgetting to change the titles. Well, I guess that's it for now.